then just go to her first slide in slide view. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's
For sure. Good morning. We'll be starting at 10:03, so hang in there while we wait for more people to join us. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to CareerSource's second State of the Workforce. I'm Julia DiTolo, Interim President and CEO of CareerSource Palm Beach County. This month's topic is changes in the modern workforce. 2020 will be remembered as a transformational time in workforce. We've gone through a record historic low to record historic high unemployment of 14% in April. Most of the retail, leisure, and hospitality industries were actually hit the most. And in a matter of months, Palm Beach County's unemployment rate dropped to 7%. Our new numbers will be out in October, this Friday for October, and we anticipate a further drop. While we anticipate a drop in unemployment, the recovery is good for some, but not for others. So today, we offer you 3 expert speakers who will share their expertise with you and talk about the changes in the workforce that they see coming. So today, I would like to introduce to you our first speaker. And when she speaks, everybody listens. Adrienne Johnston is the Director of Workforce Services at Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. Adrienne joined the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity as the Chief of the Bureau of Workforce Statistics and Economic Research. Adrienne's extensive experience in labor market information allows her to lead her current team to deliver quality data analysis, informative data visualizations, and applied research to better serve the agency and stakeholders across the state. Adrienne holds a master's degree in Applied Economics from Florida State University. It is my pleasure to now introduce Adrienne Johnston.
Hi, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I wanted to get started. First of all, just wanted to share a little bit about what we do in my bureau, just so that you're aware of some of the statistics that we produce, and that'll help kind of as I talk through them. So first of all, our team is responsible for producing the state and local area unemployment rates. Each month we release those numbers. In fact, we'll be releasing the numbers for October this Friday. And we also do the state job creation numbers. So we do that by industry and by location. So that'll be some of the information that I talk through, but then we also try to supplement with some other kind of economic data that gives us a sense of what's going on currently in the economy, both from a state perspective, but then also, of course, in your local area. So I'll start with the next slide with the unemployment rate data for the state. So you can see, I like this slide because it really shows the history of what unemployment has looked like in our state. And you can see it's pretty variable. And we got all the way down to a historic low of 2.8% back in February. So that's the lowest it had ever been. You can see Florida there in the green line. And going all the way back to the 70s, that was the low since we've been recording this data. And then almost immediately in April, we shot up to 13.8%, which is clearly also a historic high. So it even exceeded what we experienced back in the Great Recession. And what's remarkable about that is even though it was quite a steep increase for Florida in the Great Recession, there was still a little bit of a ramp up to the height of the peak unemployment rate. Here you see no ramp up. It was truly over 2 months that we reached that level. Since then, we have come down significantly. So in September, we had an unemployment rate as a state of 7.6%. So we have kind of bounced up and down a little bit around the kind of 7–8% range over the last few months. I will caution you to keep in mind as these data are revised, things do change. So we'll be releasing the revised data for September at the end of this week as well. So it's really, when things are this uncertain, it's a little hard to look at over the month changes like that and draw too many conclusions, but it's really about that longer term trend. But overall, we're coming down and we're still a little bit lower than what the nation has experienced. So while we were at 7.6, the national rate was at 7.9. Next slide, please. So how does that shake out across the regions in our state? So this gives you a sense by local workforce development area what the unemployment rate looks like. These are non-seasonally adjusted data, so they can't be totally compared to the state rate. But overall, you can see that it's really the South Florida and Central Florida regions that still have a significantly elevated unemployment rate. So the Miami, Dade, and Monroe counties areas were at 12.8%. And Palm Beach County, a little bit lower than the state rate at 7%, but still at the kind of the top of the pack there. But you can see the distribution. Some areas, particularly the rural areas, have a relatively low rate. 4% is pretty low. It's kind of what we talk about the natural rate of unemployment. So many areas are at a lower rate, but you have to keep in mind that that comes along with an understanding of the labor force statistics as well. And so what we're seeing across the state is while the unemployment rate may be coming down, there are still folks who are not participating in the labor force. And so that is still down over what we had prior to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So for Florida, the labor force has gotten back to about 97% of where we were in February. So those are people, when we talk about the labor force, we're talking about people who are employed and unemployed. So those are the two groups that make up the labor force. In Palm Beach, it's a little bit lower than that. So we're back to about 94% of the labor force that we had prior to the pandemic. So a little bit different. South Florida is certainly what felt the impact a little bit more than some of the other areas. And that you can see right here in this graphic, you can see the percent of unemployed Floridians who live in the South Florida area, including Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties, is much higher than it was prior to the pandemic. So now we're at about 46%. Back in February, back all the way back to August, we were at 30%. So significant change in the makeup of unemployed people by geographic area. And that really shows how the pandemic has hit certain areas more than others, particularly South Florida and Central Florida. Next slide. So this is an overall view, just like we looked at the historic view of the unemployment rate. This is a historic view of the total non-agricultural employment for the state. A lot of people are familiar with this as the non-farm payroll numbers, also released monthly. And you can see the Great Recession is that kind of little bump in the middle, and then we continue to grow and add jobs all the way up through the beginning of 2020. And then we had that dramatic decline in jobs. And then almost immediately those shot back up, and we got to about half of the jobs that we've lost. So a little bit more than half have come back, but we are still low relative to where we started this year at. Next slide. So one of the questions that has come up during this event is, as we look at our labor force numbers, we have a measure called labor force employment. And then we also have what I just showed you, which is what we call the CES or total non-ag employment. And we've noticed that as we see the unemployment rate coming back much quicker than maybe we see the job growth numbers coming back, we wanted to investigate what kind of causes that, because you would expect for labor force employment and the non-ag payrolls to come back at the same rate. It sounds like they would be the same. So it's kind of important to point out that there are some definitional differences between the two. So I like to share this graphic here. And it also gives us some insight into kind of the unique characteristics of how the pandemic has impacted our labor force. So the blue line at the top is our labor force employment. And you can see that historically, it's about 1 million people higher than what we count on the CES employment, those payroll numbers. And so that gives us, that million difference is about made up of individuals who are self-employed. So we know that we have at least 1 million folks who are self-employed that are calculated in that employment number that are not included in the payroll numbers. So you can see that steep decline in both numbers right there in April, and you notice that there was a bigger decline in the Laos employment numbers, those labor force employment numbers, and that's largely because self-employed were impacted at a higher rate than other payroll employment. So you can see that very clearly here where both numbers kind of converge together. And then as we are climbing back out of the impacts of COVID, self-employed are coming back at a little bit of a slower rate, and but we are getting closer to that previous relationship between the two series. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but I think it really highlights that typically what we see in a recession is these two numbers move together. And in this case, because of the role of self-employment in our economy now, and the way that this particular event impacted everybody, and it really shows up here in this particular data series. So that's a little bit of an insight that we haven't seen before in the past. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we can look at are how industries in particular are impacted by this particular event. So when we compare September 2019 to September 2020, so we're looking at the over the year change, this is a good way to look at how overall we're doing relative to where we were at the peak. And you can see that clearly leisure and hospitality has been the most impacted by this current recession, followed by professional and business services. Trade, transportation, and utilities includes retail, so you would expect to see quite a big impact there. What's interesting in this particular case is at the early part of the recession, we saw a huge impact on healthcare services, which you typically don't see in a recession. You actually continue to see growth, maybe at a slower rate. But in this case, we actually did see impacts because of the nature of the pandemic. So they are coming back in the healthcare services much faster than other industries, but that was something that's a little bit different than what you typically see in a recession. Next slide, please. And here's the same look for your area, for the West Palm Beach, Boca Raton, Delray Beach metro area. So very similar impacts here. The key thing that I will note here is that construction and financial activities have actually gained jobs over the year, which we have not seen across the rest of the state. So that's a unique impact that you see in your area, that you're actually gaining in construction and financial activities. Otherwise, the industry distribution of jobs that were lost are pretty much the same, except you'll notice that education and health services still hasn't quite recovered the way it has across the state. Next slide. So I just want to highlight here, one of the things that we do in our agency is administer reemployment assistance claims. And so if you have not seen this yet, I encourage you to take a look at our website, and you can actually see how we process, how we're doing on processing the claims that come into our agency. So we track the number of claims received, how many of those have actually been processed. You can see 99.1% of unique claims submitted have been processed, and 97.5% of those eligible claims have been paid. So there's a lot of information on here. I just like to highlight this for folks who haven't seen it yet. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it does lead me to my next slide, which shows the initial claimants by industry for March 7th through October 10th. And so since we do administer the claims, we get the information on where people are claiming from, so both by geography and by industry. And so this shows you clearly that accommodation and food services has been the largest impacted industry in terms of claimants filing for reemployment assistance. And you can see also on here, because we have the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program administered under the CARES Act, we actually have a record of self-employed individuals who are claiming benefits. So at this time, it takes us a little while to clean up the data and match people to their industry. We have a large group of none given, so those have to be matched later on, kind of on the back end. I suspect a lot of those are also part of the self-employed population. So we're actually going to see that number tick up quite a bit as well. Next slide. So in terms of recovery, one of the key things to look at are online job ads to get a sense of how businesses are advertising their employment. So this is just a very high-level overview of what we're seeing. You can actually see since May, we have continued to see more job ads come online for businesses advertising for employment. What's kind of interesting, you can't see it here, but the mix of the types of jobs are changing in response to the pandemic. So for years, registered nurses had actually been at the top of the list of as the #1 advertised job online. This was true across the state, across the country. And now what we're seeing is that's being replaced by customer service type oriented jobs and also cleaning related jobs. So certainly in response to businesses needing to beef up their cleaning services within their offices and their homes, we're seeing an increase in those types of jobs being advertised. So that's a little bit of a shift from what we've experienced in the past. Next slide. This gives a breakout of how that shapes out for your region. So Palm Beach is in the middle in that gray area. And kind of the key takeaway here is that you can see that the share of the jobs in this area, so the kind of normal percentage of statewide advertisements went down for this region. So it's below that green line, which represents Florida, but it's starting to come back. So there was a bigger, it kind of again reflects the larger impact to your region from the pandemic. And so you're starting to see those job advertisements come back across all areas, but it was a little bit slower in South Florida. The next slide. So that was online job ads. What we would love to have is a comprehensive view of all job openings by for businesses by industry. And so we now have a series that gives us a top level view for Florida job openings and hires. So this is a brand new data set from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's our first peek into how businesses responded at that total level. With true job openings and hires, and you can see the steep decline that we saw early in the year in job openings, which is in blue, and you see hires kind of rebounding. So it followed a similar pattern, and you actually see the hires rebounding, and that likely reflects the individuals who were hired back to jobs where they were maybe furloughed or laid off and then brought back on. It'll be another month or so before we get to see the rest of the year through September. Right now we only have through June, but it gives you that first little peek into how businesses responded with hiring. So next slide. And I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. I don't want to spend too much time. I know there's a lot to get through, but one of these are a couple. I'm going to kind of wrap up with a couple of things that I think are interesting to look at from a high level perspective. We always keep an eye on the Consumer Sentiment Index. You can see it's a very, very noisy, busy data series. It bounces around a lot, but it can be a good indicator of a recession as you start to see consumer sentiment decline. People are starting to tighten up their spending and they're less certain about their economic situation. Of course, what was unique about this situation is we didn't have that gradual decline before this recession. It almost hit at the same time just because of the nature of the way the pandemic kind of played out. But key here is you're starting to see it come back. Next slide. Kind of zoom in here to the more recent months so you can see that a little bit more clearly. This is also reflective of just before the election. Things are always a little bit more uncertain around an election. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on this, but we expect to see it continue to gradually move back up to the levels we had prior to the pandemic as people feel more confident about spending. And the next slide, which I think is my last slide, is a view of what consumer spending has looked like this year, which I think is pretty interesting. You can see a dramatic decline in April, which of course we would expect. Everybody kind of stopped, they halted all activities, they stopped spending a lot except for grocery. If you were to isolate this just for grocery, you would actually see that part shoot up quite a bit. But I think what's key here and what's particularly interesting is that where we stand right now is at a statewide view, we are still spending at 4.6% of the level, below the level that we were spending in January, which considering everything that's going on, I have to say is kind of remarkable. It's not nearly as low as I would have thought. We actually got back above our January spending back in August, kind of late July, I'm sorry, August, September, and a lot of that was related to school spending, kind of going back to school. So now that that's passed us by, we're still at about 4.6% below our January levels. And so it'll be interesting to watch this and see how we continue to spend throughout the holiday season. So that concludes my remarks. And I appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. I hope that was helpful.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Adrienne. I do have a question for you. We're going to put a prompt up on the screen for people to answer, a polling question. But in Palm Beach County, you're absolutely right about construction and finance, and you're right about healthcare not recovering as well. But we calculate about 20% of our workers in Palm Beach County are self-employed, and healthcare workers are actually starting to be contracted out down here. So I'm wondering if the contract work of the healthcare industry is actually, since we don't count that as a metric, going to affect the numbers. But do you anticipate that the Department of Labor will make changes in the near future so that we can have a measurable metric of our workforce related to those contracts or gig workers?
That's a great question. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics did a study, may be familiar with it. They did it a couple years ago trying to get at that exact issue. It was comprehensive. What they were trying to do is come up with a measure that could be used almost in time series. So they used a similar methodology that they had used in the past to measure what we call gig workers, but there's a lot of different categories of self-employed or kind of non-traditional work arrangements. So they had a lot of different types of those work arrangements included in the survey. It was a national survey, so we might have had, we had a little bit of state level data, didn't really drill down to the local level, unfortunately. But even with that, so you have the best of the best in statistical analysis and survey design, they struggled with it. So they actually went back to the drawing board and have done a kind of a study of the study to come up with a better methodology of teasing that information out. So it's certainly being worked on. I'm fortunate enough to be a part of a work group that does kind of look at that information, and I see that they're coming up with better ways to get at this, but it is much more challenging than I think you would expect it to be. So I think it's coming, but it's still going to be some time before we have kind of a standardized method of calculating that information. I will add to this that with the pandemic unemployment assistance, we do have much richer data on self-employed, at least for those who were impacted by the pandemic. So I know there are going to be lots of efforts to mine that information and see what we can glean from it in the future.
So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing that in the future. And I appreciate your presentation very, very much. Thank you. So we did a quick poll. Do you feel a stronger connection, an emotional connection to your company since the pandemic started? And the answers are yes, 64%, and no, 40%. So very interesting. Our next speaker is Kimberlee Carlile. Kimberlee is the Director of Talent Ready Utah, Governor Gary Herbert's initiative to increase industry and educational partnerships in Utah. The Talent Ready Utah Center resides in Utah's Governor Office of Economic Development. Overseeing all talent initiatives, Carlile has implemented pathway programs and other workforce training solutions in several different Utah industries, many of which are considered national best practices in workforce education. Before her time with the governor's office, Carlile worked as an enrollment recruiter for Utah Valley University, where she also received her bachelor's degree in communications with a minor in business management and a certificate in leadership. Carlile's experience in education communications has helped move the state's workforce initiatives into the spotlight. So welcome, Kimberlee. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well, and thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started, and I'm excited to join the conversation. I'm located here in Utah in Salt Lake City, and it's a little colder here than it is where you are all at, but we're doing well, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about what we've done over the last several years to focus our efforts more on industry and education alignment, and also talk a little bit about what we're doing in response to COVID-19. So if we want to go to the next slide, the mission of Talent Ready Utah is really to focus our efforts through business partnerships. Our office in economic development really focuses on business expansion and business growth in the state, and obviously we can't do that unless we have a strong workforce to fill those jobs. And so we've set up a few different goals to help drive our efforts. One is really focused around work-based learning. Are we engaging our businesses in the education process? And two, focusing on the high skill, high demand jobs across our state. If we want to go to the next slide, I'll tell a little bit of the backstory of kind of how Talent Ready Utah got started. In 2014, we started developing a short-term pathway program for our aerospace industry, specifically with Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Janicki Industries, Hexcel. We have a lot of strong aerospace companies in Utah, and they were concerned about their talent pipeline. And so we worked with them to develop this short-term pathway program that contains 2 courses that a high school student takes along with an internship, and then they get this certification that guarantees them a job interview with all of those companies. And so it was really the aerospace industry in 2014 where we really got our foot in the door, starting to look a little bit closer at workforce development in pathway programs. And then that has just launched into a myriad of pathway programs, youth apprenticeship programs, grant programs, computer science initiatives, and we've just continued to grow and expand. In 2017, Governor Herbert announced Talent Ready Utah as one of his top initiatives in his State of the State address. And then in 2018, the Talent Ready Utah Center was officially passed into legislation. So if we want to go to the next slide, you will see the Talent Ready Utah board. What's nice about this board is that it's very holistic. We have 2 legislators that sit on this board. We have our education leaders from K-12 and higher ed that sit on this board. We have 4 CEOs across the state that sit on the board, and then government executives that sit on this board. And so it's really this board that drives the initiatives of Talent Ready Utah. Next slide. So Talent Ready Utah has 3 main programs within our jurisdiction that really help to tackle some of the workforce solutions that we're seeing across our state, and they serve various populations. I mentioned the Aerospace Pathways program. That was our first pathway program. All of our pathway programs start in high school. Some of them offer recognized credentials while students are in high school, so it's a certification that they can earn in a year. Some of our pathways go beyond high school and into our technical colleges or our universities, but all of our pathways have various on-ramps and off-ramps that allow an individual to go into the workforce after they've earned a certification, get some job experience if they'd like, and then come back and continue their training. So we have various pathway programs. We also have youth apprenticeship programs that also are available for high school students. We have a youth apprenticeship program where high school seniors split their time 50-50. Half the time they're in school, the other half of the time they're completing their apprenticeship and earning a paycheck while they're doing so. And then the third program is called the Utah Works program. And this program is focused on adults 18 years and older. It is a short-term training program where an individual can receive a paycheck from the company while they're going through the short-term training program before they're officially employed by those companies. If we want to go to the next slide, I'll touch on a little bit of the Talent Ready Utah initiatives. So not only does Talent Ready Utah oversee specific programs, but we also have other initiatives that we focus on. Number 1 is computer science. We are in the middle of working with our tech industry and our state legislature to fund an initiative that would allow computer science courses to be taught in every school in K through 12 across the state of Utah. That's a big priority for us, and we realize the need for computer science across the state as it impacts and will impact almost every job as we look to the future. Keys to Success is our online counseling platform. This is where individuals can go to learn about various career pathways and opportunities. And then the Learn and Work in Utah is our short-term training program that we've put in place for COVID-19. So if we want to go to the next slide, I'll just briefly touch on some of the pathway programs that we have. We have one in aerospace, life sciences, diesel technology, construction, and aviation. And I'll go through these next slides pretty quick, but I just wanted to touch show you the companies that we're working with for each of these pathways. If we want to go to the next slide, you'll see this is just a summary of what's included in our pathway programs. So we focus on a work-based learning piece. Typically, we encourage industry to provide either an internship or an externship, but we also have capstone projects and job shadows available for students. We are heavily focused on stackable credentials. We want to make sure an individual is earning credit while they're going through the program. And then also, because our pathway programs are led by industry, they all culminate in a guaranteed job interview for the individuals who earn that certification. If we want to go to the next slide, here are the companies that we are partnering with on our aerospace pathways program. All of these companies provide a guaranteed job interview. The next slide, this is our life science companies, another big industry in Utah. Again, guaranteed job interview. Next slide. Here we have our diesel tech pathway programs. We actually have over 40 diesel companies across the state of Utah that offer the guaranteed job interview. This is just a small showing of those companies. Next slide. Our architecture, engineering, and construction pathway, again, there's so many companies involved in this one. We are highlighting just the trade organizations that represent those companies. And then the next slide, our aerospace, our Rotor maintenance and pilot pathway program. Again, this one represented by many companies across the state, both in the medical field and in the tourism field. Next slide. And this is, like I said, our pathway programs are focused on our high demand, high wage industries across the state. We call them our sectors or our clusters. And our state legislature has been very supportive in helping to fund a lot of these pathway programs. Our state legislature has allocated funding every year to pathway programs that are in a high demand field, and that includes stackable credentials among various education partners, starting with the school districts and moving on up into higher education, and also the programs that are heavily focused on industry and helping to solve their workforce needs. So because of strategic workforce investment that was passed in 2016, we've been able to help fund over 26 pathway programs across the state, and this is ongoing funding. So these programs are receiving money every year from the legislature to support the program. If we want to go to the next slide, this is a little bit about our apprenticeship program that we have here in Utah. So the Youth Apprenticeship program was piloted by Stadler US, which is a Swiss company who relocated to Salt Lake City for their North American headquarters. And they obviously are really big on apprenticeships coming from Switzerland. And we have had the opportunity to work with them to establish our first high school apprenticeship program, where a high school student is spending 50% of their school week working for the company. The pathway then is, or the apprenticeship program is in total a 3-year program. If we want to go to the next slide, I'll touch briefly on Utah Works. We are working with 3 of our various higher ed institutions across the state to develop short-term training programs. So for companies like Stadler Rail, other manufacturing companies, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, they've all taken advantage of this short-term training program where individuals 18 years or older can enroll. They complete, a 2-week up to a 2-month training. They receive payment while they're going through the training, and then they are trained specifically for one company to go and work for that company. So that's a program that's been very focused on our adult learner population, those who are underemployed or unemployed. And then if we want to go to the next slide, I wanted to spend the remainder of our time just briefly talking about Learn and Work in Utah. This was our response to COVID-19. Our state legislature allocated $16.5 million of the CARES funding to short-term training programs. So we have 16 higher ed institutions in Utah. They were offering short-term training programs, either online or a hybrid option with COVID, where individuals could enroll. They would enroll tuition free. So the CARES funding covered the cost of tuition, and they were able to earn some sort of certification in a training program that was of interest to them. We had everything from a specific skill set in the healthcare industry to technical certifications to upgrading skills in Microsoft Suite or Adobe Suite. We had design, we had UX design. We even had some police officer trainings and other diesel tech certifications. We actually had about 150 different short-term training programs taking place this semester. So we've spent the $16.5 million. We've been able to train upwards of 5,000 individuals in the short-term training options available throughout the state. And if we go to the last slide here, this is just the timeline of how quickly we were able to get these programs in place. We found out in June that the funding would be available. We worked with the higher ed institutions to get their training programs in place and started in August, and then the funding has to be spent by the end of this year. So we've been working very hard to make sure those who have been impacted by COVID-19 has had the opportunity to enroll tuition free in these higher ed short-term training programs. We call this program Learn and Work in Utah. We have a big ad campaign going right now, so we've seen a lot of billboards and commercials and media around this, which has helped to increase our enrollment efforts. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what we've been doing in Utah over the past couple of years, and also what we've been doing here this year to help with the COVID-19 response. And I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Kimberlee. That was outstanding information. I do have two questions for you. Here in Palm Beach County, we do have a very good relationship with our career and technical and adult education, as well as our state community colleges. Our biggest problem is getting the businesses engaged for our learning process. Did you engage those businesses at the state level or at the local level?
Great question. So we try to do both. It's really the local level where the rubber really hits the road. That's where the school districts are interacting on a close level with the employers in their community. But we have found that by having a statewide voice in the support of a governor and the state legislature, that has helped to get these companies more involved, kind of make some introductions, and then let them work on the local level.
Okay, and that was a pretty aggressive timeline you had. How has the pandemic affected the timeline?
Yeah, so we, I guess you could say because of the pandemic, we had to move so quickly. We saw that there was an opportunity to use some of the CARES funding to help retrain our workforce who had been impacted by the pandemic. But if we didn't have a lot of those relationships already in place, we wouldn't have been able to meet that time frame. We had close relationships with our institutions, and the institutions already had really close relationships with employers.
Great. Thank you so very, very much for your presentation. Appreciate you joining us today. We had a quick poll question. It said, aside from health, security, and pandemic, which of the following processes was the greatest threat to your firm's growth over the next 3 years? Is it environmental climate change, adapting to the work environment, the remote work environment, talent risk, returning to territorialism, or access to capital for growth? And it's definitely adapting to the remote work environment. I think the most successful companies have been able to pivot to remote work environment and upskilling their staff in, as Kimberlee said, computer sciences and technology. So thank you, Kimberlee, again. Our next speaker is Chancellor Henry Mack. Henry serves as the Chancellor of the Florida Department of Education, overseeing the Division of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. As Chancellor, he oversees all workforce education programs and economic development initiatives for the department, helping to oversee a system of 48 technical colleges, 28 state community colleges, and K-12 CTE system, with a combined enrollment of over 1 million students annually. He's responsible for the state offices of Apprenticeship, Adult Education, and Articulation and Career Education Policy. Prior to being the Chancellor, he was the visiting lecturer in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Miami. He was the Associate Vice President of Workforce Education and Innovation at Broward College. And Henry has been is a graduate in philosophy and theology from Catholic University of America and is completing his educational doctorate in education administration from the University of Miami. Welcome, Chancellor Mack.
Thank you so very much. Great to be with everyone. Thank you, Julia, for the invitation. Of course, thank you to my fellow panelists, Kimberlee and Adrienne from our partner over here in Tallahassee, the Department of Economic Opportunity, with whom and but for whom a lot of the things that we're doing here at the Department of Education would not be possible. And it's just interesting to think about education kind of around Kimberlee's points in terms of or around workforce development. That is to say, understanding how workforce education and training, specifically career and technical education, can be an acceleration mechanism or tool for economic prosperity and recovery. That is to say, the extent to which workforce education and training is a necessary condition for workforce development. We know that businesses need talent and they need graduates from our high quality education institutions that are equipped with the kinds of skills, competencies, and knowledge that suit their industry, that suit their business. And never before, I really think, in the history of Florida have we been so hyper-focused, we've been so concentrated on the alignment between education outcomes, what is actually being taught in the classroom, and what industry and business demands, not just theoretically, but down to the skill level. And that's sort of what I really kind of want to talk about today, is not just the close alignment between the Department of Education here in Tallahassee and the Department of Economic Opportunity and our phenomenal friends at CareerSource Florida. That alignment is nothing short of, I think, historic in the state of Florida. But to get a little deeper into some of the other initiatives that the Department of Education is thinking through that ultimately impact, I think, the audience today on this panel and on this call. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Get There Florida is the Department of Education's recent marketing and enrollment campaign. Get There Florida aims at increasing enrollment at our technical colleges, all 48 of them, and our 28 state colleges, all post-secondary public institutions. Next slide, please. And this is important because we know that the future of work demands employees with, again, the kinds of credentials, knowledge, skills, and abilities that industry not only demands and needs, but will ensure for their economic success and prosperity, despite what disruptions may come. And despite the emphasis on skills training, we know that job opportunities are still shifting towards those with post-secondary degrees. That is to say, with an AA or an AS or a BS in hand. So as valuable as career and technical education is, as valuable as these short-term certifications are, as valuable as industry certifications are, the data is clear. Job opportunities are still shifting towards those with a degree. And if anything has taught us this, it's been the COVID pandemic, that those that were least susceptible, those that were least impacted from the pandemic were those with with a degree in hand, right? 63% of those either who filed for unemployment or were laid off as a result of the COVID pandemic nationwide, over 63% were those without a high school diploma or a post-secondary degree. In short, the less educated workers see higher unemployment. And the Get There campaign, if you just visit gettherefl.com, is again our attempt to enroll students in a quality post-secondary degree program, allowing for that flexibility to come in and out on the road, off the road, providing multiple on-ramps, and as Kimberlee talked about, trying to figure out how to structure the system so as to provide stackability. That is to say, short-term wins that lead to long-term ROI and credentials that ultimately accelerate an individual to economic self-sufficiency. If you could skip to the next slide. This kind of like structuring of the education system is, again, not only important for the individual, but important for the future of the Florida economy, hands down, right? We know that the degree matters, and we know that there is opportunity, I think, within the COVID pandemic and the COVID crisis to reignite conversations around post-secondary education and training, to target those dislocated and impacted workers in the hospitality and leisure sectors that have been so impacted that they need immediately reskilling, upskilling or retooling, so that they can find an opportunity or find themselves being able to be accelerated in other existing opportunities and less likely, again, susceptible to disruption. And so, to Kimberlee's point, our governor, as many of you might know by now, earmarked $35 million out of his CARES Act, Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, to target dislocated workers, adults, and re-enroll them in our post-secondary public education institutions, all 48 technical colleges and 28 state colleges. And the Get There campaign is, again, an attempt to showcase this, to showcase the scholarship opportunities, the access to public education and training at the post-secondary level, and really to connect all individuals to meaningful employment. If you can skip to the next slide. So I wanted to provide, next slide too. I wanted to provide a little bit of overview of the Get There Florida campaign. Visit gettherefl.com. It is through and through a marketing and enrollment campaign, but something that we need help with selling. So if you could please promote, there's some great success stories there. There's a college locator. You could just fly through the next maybe 2 or 3 or 4, actually 5 slides, if you could just go rapidly right through them. The website is an interactive website that provides a college locator, business intelligence tools, career assessment tools. One of the phenomenal tools actually being offered in Palm Beach County, virtual career system. We have a link to that there. We also have a direct link for someone who is not sure of what they want to do, not sure of the education program or workforce training program that they want to enter. You can fill out a form, get contacted directly or connected rather with someone right here at the Department of Education, and we can help you through the enrollment and admissions process, again, across the state of Florida. Not only is it an enrollment campaign, it's a fundamental rebranding of career and technical education. We have a toolkit, digital media marketing downloads and collateral, help sort of rebranding and reframing the story of career and technical education. As many people might know, CTE has always sort of been perceived as something opposed to traditional academics, something other than the traditional university pathway or route. Namely, it was something for maybe perhaps those that weren't academically adept or able to cut it, quote unquote. And I think this sort of framing and this sort of narrative is unfortunate. You can just keep going through the slides. And so the Get There campaign is an attempt to sort of elevate CTE and sort of reimagine it and excite people about the prospect of enrolling in a career and technical education pathway. As having as a goal, again, the degree. It is the aim of the Department of Education to get people towards that degree, and it's a matter of sort of pitching, I think, to the state of Florida anew the viable on-ramps and opportunities that can help people get there. This would not be possible if it was not for the support of Perkins 5. Perkins 5 is the preeminent federal investment of money that states get every year to enhance their career and technical education programs, both at the K-12 level, but also at the post-secondary level with institutions like Palm Beach State College. The state of Florida gets about $75 million annually, and that's set to increase probably another $5 to $6 million next year. And it is, again, supplemental monies for institutions, public institutions, our K-12 schools, and our post-secondary institutions like the Florida college systems to do phenomenal things with their career and technical education programs. principally, again, to provide an opportunity for acceleration to a higher credential, but also to get employed. Florida has a new plan, and these are some of the highlights of the plan. We at the Department of Education, together with DEO and together with CareerSource Florida, are hyper focused on apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships, all of which are now fundable activities under Perkins 5 and incidentally under WIOA. So Kimberlee, to the question before, how do we get employers more involved? It's through apprenticeships. We need employers and businesses at the table as we think about expanding registered apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs for your business, knowing that the investment in an apprenticeship program ultimately saves businesses money. You are more likely to retain the employee, in-house training, and getting them connected to a college pathway or career while having funding support for doing that is sort of a win-win. And I think we need to sort of think strategically about how we are, again, cultivating the kind of connections that Kimberlee alluded to in the great state of Utah. Perkins 5 also has an emphasis on entrepreneurship education and training. We've set aside $1 million this year. We'll probably set aside $2 million next year for the next 4 years to scale entrepreneurship education and training initiatives across our schools. The aim is not only to graduate students, hopefully, who could start their own business, but to teach the kinds of competencies and skills that entrepreneurship education sort of fosters or cultivates. We want graduates who are critical thinkers. We want graduates who are creative. We want graduates who are able to undergo risk propensity, who are able to take on risk and understand how to pivot, how to ideate, how to be creative, display high levels of empathy and great communication. And entrepreneurship education sort of does that. And the last thing we're focused on is, again, this market alignment. So the Commissioner of Education, Richard Corcoran, and Ron DeSantis, and now Speaker Sprowls and everyone here in Tallahassee are hyper focused on the extent to which our education programs are preparing students for the future of work. That is to say, how well are they aligned to meet local skill demand? And we're doing some very aggressive things to ensure that that alignment exists. And Perkins 5, thankfully, is supporting some of it. You can fly right through the next 4 slides for me. It's just a reiteration of why we're focusing on entrepreneurship, knowing the high emphasis on entrepreneurship from businesses and industry, and then connecting that to what we're calling an annual CTE audit. This slide here shows preliminary data that we've been sort of mapping and looking at, trying to figure out how well, again, are our programs aligned to meet labor market demand, and how well are they performing? How well are they graduating students? What are their post-completion outcomes? How are they earning? Are they earning in jobs that were aligned to their program of study? And soon we'll be publishing the results of the CTE audit. This is a slide from a preliminary sort of statewide snapshot of the extent to which our local programs, again, quote unquote, are performing. If you can skip to the slide that begins with adult education, this is the last thing I want to touch on before I can conclude my remarks. In addition to the alignment of education to business, or rather industry, ensuring again for that the teaching toward what skills are in demand, we know we have a serious issue with uplifting millions of Floridians in view of getting them access to a post-secondary education, but for one reason or another do not possess a high school diploma or its equivalent. Almost 2 million adults or residents in the state of Florida without a high school diploma. 24% of residents in Florida ages 16 to 74 can barely read. They are functioning at the lowest levels of proficiency. That is to say, they can't read beyond the grade reading level of a second grader. 35% are functioning at the lowest levels of numeracy. They cannot do basic arithmetic. In addition to this 1.8 million, the total population that we're looking at here is just over 2 million. And we know if we are going to sort of make an impact on the state of the economy, we know we need to target this population. Within Palm Beach County itself, we have over 300,000 residents that sort of fit within this sort of bucket of opportunity. And if we are, I think, again, to have an economy that's firing on all cylinders, again, we need to try to figure out how we can pay attention to and uplift those most vulnerable, those in those zip codes that have been historically neglected and not attended to. And the impact of COVID really has highlighted this urgency. If you can skip to the next slide, for which reason we are really looking to try and figure out how to disrupt how the Department of Education does adult education, developing a methodology and a strategy really to identify what credentials are of value so that we know the ROI to the student and to the state is a good one, and how to, again, help individuals accelerate their time to economic self-sufficiency. Without this focus on adult education and what we can do by way of transforming adult education, you know, a lot, I think, is going to be lost, for which reason the governor and the commissioner have issued executive orders focusing on workforce education and training. And we now understand, I think, and I'll end on this point, more so ever than in the history, I think, of the Department of Education here in the state of Florida, how much workforce education and economic development go hand in hand. We need to do a better job, I think, of breaking down silos and working together and collaboratively so that our curriculum and our students are not only aligned, but they can immediately enter a job that can be fundamentally transformative for them and for those around them. And so again, just wanted to thank everybody. Really appreciate the quick opportunity to highlight some of the things that are happening here at the Department of Education and with our commissioner. We just came from a State Board of Education meeting, which is happening now, incidentally, and the First Lady presented together with a student talking about the opening of schools and the importance of in-person instruction and training. Happy to report that over 1 million students are back face-to-face in brick and mortar. All of our CTE programs are open for face-to-face instruction, as well as most of our CTE programs at the state colleges. We know how in-person training not only matters for in-person education and training, not only matters for the success and the health and the mental health of students, but also how much that matters for economic well-being, recovery, and prosperity. So if you didn't get a chance to see the remarks this morning from the First Lady and an individual, a student, they are absolutely moving, and I would encourage you to look at the Florida channel. It's been recorded there. Again, want to thank everyone on the call and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Chancellor Mack, for joining us today. You mentioned so many things, but most importantly, the stackable credentials, adult education, and also an inclusive recovery for those millions of people that currently have no skills. We also have a critical component of our corporate success is that they reskill their current employees in order to retain them. So there's a lot to get there too. So
absolutely. No, perfect summary, Julia. Perfect summary. Thanks for that. Yes.
Thank you very much. That was quite a presentation from all three speakers. We really appreciate that today. So our last quick poll question is, do you feel Florida has a talent capital with skills and capability to attract businesses to our state? And yes, we do. You know, one thing about Palm Beach County is that we have a very diverse economy down here. The Business Development Board has made it a mission really to have a well-rounded economic situation here where we have businesses from all sectors. So we're not reliant strictly on hospitality and retail like other counties have been affected. So for us, our recovery will probably be a lot better. But get there, the Florida Workforce Education Initiative, combined with the Department of Economic Opportunity and the CareerSource, I think is a great partnership. Registered apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, and entrepreneurship. We're taking a good look at that here in Palm Beach County as well. So the pandemic has certainly changed things for all of us. I want to thank our three speakers today, Adrienne Johnston, Kimberlee Carlile, and Chancellor Mack. I hope this session was very informative for you, and I welcome you back when we have our third State of the Workforce presentation. Until then, be well. Thank you very much.